She was just a girl. Not a nun. Not a mystic. Not even someone particularly religious. But one night, everything changed. It didn't start with a voice. There was no vision. No miracle. Just a presence, strong, still, and silent, standing in the corner of her bedroom. Night after night, he returned. A man in a brown robe. His head bowed. His lips unmoving. And yet, she felt like the room was filled with prayer. She had never seen him before. But over time, she came to recognize his face. From pictures. From whispers. It was Padre Pio. And though he never spoke a word, he began to shape her soul. Years later, she would become a nun. But long before she wore the habit, Padre Pio was already guiding her, through silence, through prayer, through presence. This is the true story of Sister Rita Montella, and the man who visited her before she even knew she was called. And if you've ever felt a presence near you while praying, don't ignore it. Folded hands, let us know in the comments if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain. You're not alone. And maybe you were never meant to be. Padre Pio was no ordinary priest. He was a spiritual threshold, standing between this world and the next. Born Francesco Forgione in a small Italian village, he lived a life of prayer, sacrifice, and deep suffering. At the age of 23, something began to happen that shocked even the church. The stigmata, the physical wounds of Christ, appeared on his hands, feet, and side. They never healed. They never stopped bleeding. And he never once asked for them. But what made Padre Pio even more mysterious wasn't what people could see. It was what they couldn't. He was said to read souls in confession, to appear in multiple places at once, to speak with angels, to battle demons, and to pray for hours in silence so deep, it felt like time itself stood still. Thousands traveled to see him. Some came broken. Many left changed. But not everyone who was touched by Padre Pio came to him. Sometimes he came to them. In the next moments, you'll discover how a young girl, unknown to the world, became the quiet recipient of something sacred. Not a vision, not a voice, but a visitor who would change her life forever. She was still a teenager, living in her family's home. No one in her town knew who she would become, and neither did she. Her days were simple, her faith quiet. She had no visions, no mystical leanings, no dramatic conversions. Just a heart open to God, in her own unremarkable way. But then, one night, something shifted. As she lay in bed, preparing to fall asleep, she felt something unusual. Not fear, not anxiety, but a deep stillness, like the air itself was watching her. When she opened her eyes, she saw him. A man cloaked in brown, standing near the wall. His head was bowed, his hands folded. He said nothing. He simply stood there. The first time it happened, she froze. But he didn't move, didn't approach, just stood in silence, as if praying. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Something in her knew this was no threat. And night after night he returned. She told no one. Because how do you explain a man who stands in your room, never speaks, and disappears by morning? It wasn't until much later, after seeing his image in a Catholic magazine, that she recognized the face. It was Padre Pio, the man who had never visited her town, whose name she barely knew. But somehow, he knew her. Folded hands, if this story is touching something in you, consider liking the video so more souls can hear it too. There are visits that don't need words, only hearts ready to receive them. The visits continued. Night after night, the figure would appear, never speaking, never moving closer, never interrupting. But slowly, something changed inside Rita. She began to sense something sacred in the silence. The room no longer felt like her own. It felt like a chapel. One evening, without understanding why, she picked up her rosary. She didn't say a word aloud. She just began to pray, slowly, reverently, bead by bead. The man stood still as always. But now, it felt as if he was praying with her. No words were exchanged. There was no audible voice, no grand revelation. But in her soul, she felt something shift, a spiritual alignment. It was as if her prayer had been joined. From that moment on, whenever he appeared, she would reach for her rosary. And together, in complete silence, they would pray. Sometimes she wept. Sometimes she simply sat in peace. But always, he stayed until the final amen. It became a rhythm, a mystery, a spiritual bond deeper than she could explain. And though no one else in the house knew, though no one believed anything unusual was happening, Rita's soul was being quietly transformed. She began to crave silence, to seek solitude, to feel drawn to something far beyond this world. She wasn't being haunted. She was being formed. Years later she would say, "I learned to pray before I learned to speak it." Because some prayers don't begin in the mouth. They begin in presence, in surrender, in silence shared with a saint. Bell, if you feel drawn to these hidden stories of faith, subscribe to Beyond Yourself now. Some of the most powerful encounters happen in the quiet. She never asked for a sign. She never expected a calling. But something within her was changing. Rita began to move through her days differently. She still helped around the house. She still lived her quiet life. But her heart, it was no longer anchored in this world. She began to crave moments alone, to sit in silence even without the visits, to reflect, to listen, to just be still. Her friends noticed the difference. She was kind, but distant, present, but not attached, as if she were walking in two realities at once. Every time she closed her eyes in prayer, she felt herself returning to that silent rhythm, the quiet prayers shared with someone who never spoke but always remained. The visits became less frequent, but her conviction grew stronger. She didn't tell anyone what was happening, not out of fear, but because she knew some things are too sacred for noise. Over time, she realized her heart wasn't made for marriage, not for children, not for the world. It was made to belong to God, completely, and without anyone pressuring her, without anyone knowing the full truth. Rita Montella began preparing to become a nun, not because she chose it, but because, long before she even understood it, He had chosen her. Years passed. Rita Montella took her vows and became a nun in the Augustinian order. Her life was now silence, prayer, service. No one suspected the hidden story she carried inside her heart. She never spoke of it, not even to her closest sisters in the convent, not to her spiritual director, not to her family, because the memory wasn't just precious, it was sacred. She didn't want attention. She didn't seek validation. For her, those nights of silent prayer with Padre Pio were not a miracle to be broadcast. They were a gift given to form her soul. But as the years passed, and the world grew louder, and hearts grew colder, she began to feel a weight. "They don't know that God still speaks, even in silence," she once said. "They don't know that heaven still visits the earth." And so, near the end of her life, she quietly shared her story. No books, no stage, no camera lights, just a simple testimony from a woman no one expected, who had once been just a girl, and whose room, for reasons still unexplained, had become a chapel in the night, a place where a saint came to pray, not to impress her, not to heal her, but to form her, and through her, to speak again. Why would Padre Pio visit a young girl he had never met? Why appear night after night, and never speak a word? Because some encounters aren't meant to impress, they're meant to form. Rita Montella wasn't a mystic. She wasn't asking for visions. She didn't seek the supernatural. And that's exactly why she received it. Heaven often chooses the humble, the unnoticed, the ones who are already listening, even when they don't realize it. Padre Pio didn't appear to teach her theology. He came to pray silently with her. Because sometimes the most powerful formation doesn't come from sermons, but from presence, from stillness, from spiritual companionship, from a shared surrender that words can't carry. Her story reminds us that God is still moving, still calling, still sending saints into hidden places, not for the world to applaud, but for hearts to awaken. Maybe that's why you're hearing this now, because God still visits, not always through visions, not always with miracles, sometimes through a quiet invitation to return, to pray again, to believe again. If God could reach her through silence, He can reach you too. So tonight, when all is quiet, listen, because you never know who's kneeling beside you. You may never see a saint standing in your room. You may never hear a voice from beyond the veil. But that doesn't mean heaven is silent. It simply means you have to listen differently. Sister Rita Montella didn't need a miracle. She didn't ask for one. But her soul was ready. And when God wanted to form her, He didn't send noise. He sent a presence. Padre Pio didn't preach to her. He didn't perform signs. He simply showed up, night after night, and invited her into the kind of prayer that transforms everything, quietly. What if God has been trying to reach you the same way? Not through fireworks, but through that nudge in your heart, that longing for silence, that whisper you've been ignoring. Tonight, make space, turn off the noise, light a candle, pick up your rosary, and maybe, just maybe, you'll discover that you were never really praying alone. Speech balloon, if this story touched something in you, comment below, I'm ready to listen. Outbox Trey shared this video with someone who has forgotten that God still visits in the silence. Bell and subscribe to Beyond Yourself, because here we don't just tell stories. We remember the ones heaven still whispers.